Are you planning out your next big custom build and can't decide what axles you want to run? Bought versus built, that's the big debate. Obviously, building them, you get a lot more sense of pride in it. I've done both, and I have both here to show you. So let's dive deep into what goes into each one. So we get tons of calls on a daily basis about what axles you should run on whatever Jeep you're building, whether it's a full-blown rock crawler, if it's mostly daily driver, tires that you're gonna be running, everything. Right here is a perfect example of what you would be running if you were to build your own set. Most common, it's going to come off of a Ford Super Duty. 05 through 07 and 2008 through 10 are the most common that we see used, although there are some years after that that are popular. Before that, I don't think it's worth as much to use those axles just because the upgrades in 05 definitely make it worth going to the 05 and up axles. They're wider, they have 35 spline axle shafts, and on top of that, you get bigger brakes, better steering. This particular Jeep right here, this is my personal 2016 Jeep JK. I've done both. I have built axles for it, I have bought axles for it, so I can help you with every single aspect of that. This right here is a 2010 Super Duty 60 front that I started with. The big thing about starting with these axles is the cleanup. You're gonna have to find a set. It's gonna be junkyard, a pick and pull, Craigslist, marketplace, any of that. You have to find a set first, then get that set to your shop.
Oh, I have faith in you, but this isn't a junkyard, this is a garage.
You're gonna need tons of cutoff wheels, tons of beer, tons of time to get these things taken care of. There's a lot of cleaning up you have to do. On the 2005 and up Super Duties, they have the radius arms on there and they're massive brackets on the passenger and driver side. Once you get all that cleaned up, you have to get down to bare tube, use a flap disc. You're about 20 cutoff wheels in, million cuss words in, sweat, everything. Then you have to find the truss kit that you want to run. I personally have used the Artec trusses several times in the past with great luck. This one has an Artec truss on it. Once you get your truss and everything figured out, it's not just put everything on and you're done. You need to actually figure out where your axle's gonna go, set your pinion angle, get all your degrees correct, all your geometry, because that's what's gonna make the vehicle ride correct in the end.
Well, it's the carry the 4 and it doesn't work.
Once you get your axle set into place and you figure out where it's going to be positioned on the vehicle, you're also going to have to decide what type of suspension are you going to be running with it. Are you going to be running factory location control arms for a Jeep JK, TJ, JL, what have you, and what shocks you're going to be running. You're going to be running bolt-in shocks with a coil spring, or you're going to be running coilover. This particular axle that I have here is set up for coilover, actually coilover bypass setup, which is on that Jeep now. So once you have everything that you need on the axle cut off, and you have your trusses figured out where they need to go, and you start burning them in. A big problem that guys run into is whenever you clean these axle tubes up, you're gonna be left with a mess. And this is a 1/2-inch wall tubing on the Super Duty axles, but a lot of times guys will blow through them. So make sure you clean that thing up, make sure there's no holes through there, and you're gonna blow out all your seals inside as well.
But you don't say that.
Welding on your truss, be very careful with these things. Yes, I mean, if you have a welder at home or whatever, guys can burn these things in. I've seen multiple times guys will just do a full weld on them and they'll actually bend the housing, making it a big old smiley, and it's useless afterwards. So what you're going to want to do is weld in small sections throughout the axle and then throw a welding blanket over it. That way it cools consistently throughout. This whole entire center section right here is all cast. I don't know if you guys have ever welded plate steel to cast. It's not the easiest thing to do. You're gonna have to heat up all the cast on there and then burn on your brackets. This side, on the 05 and up Super Duties, the driver's side, this is a major pain. If any of you guys have ever cleared these off, they have sleeves that go all the way to the C on these things, and then the brackets for the radius arms. You're gonna have to cut back about 2.5 inches all the way around without blowing through the tube on these. I've seen guys score these all the way around and then put a weld on them and actually shear the whole driver's side tube off on a trail. After you get all that set up, your front axle's ready to bolt in essentially. So you got your control arm mount, you got your suspension, all that figured out. A lot of guys don't realize on these Super Duty axles, whenever you build them, it's a stout axle, great axle. This center section is so far offset on the driver's side that you're actually gonna run into the frame at full bump. On the stock JKs, and on the Dynatrac axles, that center section is moved more towards the center. That gives you a ton more clearance whenever the driver's side suspension goes to full bump or whenever the axle itself is at full bump. You're gonna have to do some pretty wild things to get that to clear. This one has a custom bracket on it. You have to cut all the frame side track bar bracket off. You have to actually move it forward to get it to clear that center section. This axle has an aftermarket diff guard on it. That gives you a little extra clearance on the steering, which the steering is another afterthought that many people have on these Super Duty axle setups. There's tons of great options that look great on paper. I've done several of them in the past, running the stock knuckles and taking high steer brackets from several different manufacturers and welding those on. Again, you're welding steel to cast, which isn't the easiest thing to do. And then whenever you're done, the steering ends up so far offset forward that your geometry isn't ideal.
Not great, but it's not horrifying.
This particular axle set, I'm running the reed knuckles on there. I have nothing bad to say about these things. I love them, but it's also a big expense. In doing so, you're replacing the whole entire knuckle. They do take factory Super Duty unit bearings, which is a plus, stock shafts, aftermarket 1550 shafts. With this set, it comes with a high steer arm on the passenger side, and there's several different options you can run. This particular set I've ran aluminum steering on in the past, and I've really liked it. Some of the issues in the end, like the last few percent to get this thing rocking on the JK, especially a 2012 one up with automatic transmission, their computer systems are a lot more finicky on these. So you're gonna be battling sensors with the ABS. On the rear, you're gonna have to take the toe rings and actually have them pressed on.
I'm going to reinvest my money into the community.
Oh, that's a very nice gesture. What were you saying?
A lot of guys don't know this, but on the front, the ABS sensors are not plug and play. These are actually Ram 2500 sensors that do plug into the JK, but now you're using Jeep JK platform with Ram 2500 sensors going into a Ford Super Duty axle.
I'm confused because I never went to school.
One of the good things about these axles are you can go down to the local parts store. If you break something, you can get new shafts, you can get new unit bearings, axle seals. That is a plus with these things. A lot of people think whenever they're building these axles, they're saving themselves money. Yes, I've seen some budget builds. I've seen some directly taken off of a Super Duty with 410 gears in them. Guys will run the factory Super Duty locker in the back or just weld their rear spider gears in them. Run the stock knuckles. I've seen some real budget builds with them, but I honestly don't think that those vehicles run the greatest. It's good over time, but if you want to build it up over time, that's great. But right off the bat, I don't think that the performance is worth the effort in going into the swap. This one is built how I wanted to build it. So I have the 2010 Super Duty 60 front. Then I have 538 gears, an ARB locker in there, reed knuckles, power stop brakes. I'm running Warn lockout hubs on it, and 2.5-ton aluminum steering.
We can just transfer money from your account into a portfolio with your son, and it's gone!
The factory Super Duty brakes, the calipers on these, are perfectly fine. I don't think it's worth upgrading them. They actually work really well, and you can go get parts for them at your local parts store. The rears are a little bit different. My 2010 is a matching to the front, obviously. In 2008, the Super Duty on the center section on the rear, Sterling 10.5, actually has extra casting on the center section, and that'll run into the fuel tank on the stock JKs. To get the rear to work on a stock JK, you're gonna have to push the rear axle back quite a bit or swap out the tank. There's just too much interference. I've seen guys do it running tiny little bitty U-joints in the back, which isn't ideal because then you have a really weak spot on a big old heavy rig. On the rear Sterling that I built, I'm running a 1410, but I also got rid of the factory JK tank. I'm running a 20-gallon fuel cell on this. Everybody I know that has tried to keep the factory tank on there has actually beat and bashed in the fuel tank to get the rear Sterling to work. And ultimately, in the end, they just swapped either a TJ tank, which I can help you with that, or they just go to something like a Dynatrac auxiliary tank like this on this. The rear Sterling 10.5 that comes on the Super Duties, when used with the Jeep JK, the tone rings don't match up. So you're gonna actually have to take the rear hub and you're gonna have to have a shop machine around it and have a tone ring pressed on there. Then you're gonna have to blow through and cut out all of the parking brake bracket, get that all lined up and hope that your rear ABS sensor lines up perfectly in there. I battled that with this thing multiple times. It's been done, it's worked, and then something will hit it on a trail and it'll actually move the ABS sensor. This thing goes into limp mode.
It's just one of those days!
I've had tons of headaches with that. Now I've got buddies that run and customers that run JKs that are manuals or in the 11 and olders with the 3.8. They're not as finicky. The 2012 and up automatic with the 3.6 isn't the happiest to run this setup. So a big thing I hear all the time is I don't want to fork out the money for a bolt-in axle set. I want to build it on my own. That's great. I've been around Jeeps forever. I've built multiple sets. I have tons of buddies that are running built sets. They work great. Here's a little cost breakdown in reality of what it takes to build one of these axle sets properly. Of course, price is subject to change. It depends on where you're located and when you're buying it. This particular set I found off of Craigslist, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years ago, and I think I paid around $1,200 to $1,400 for a front and rear complete kit. I've seen them go for cheaper than that, and I've seen them go for 2-3 times more than that. Once you find this set, you're really rolling the dice. You don't know how good the brakes are. You have no idea what the truck was used for before. You don't know if it was an accident, if the tubing's bent, if the guts are destroyed or anything. So now I have my axles. I have them at home. I mean, you're probably easy $100 worth of cut-off discs into this thing, consumables with the plasma cutter, probably 20 or more hours into building the actual axle set itself. If you're doing it at home, great. If you have the knowledge and tools to do it, that's how I did it. Just a little bit of time, consuming a little bit of headaches. Now think about it, if you're paying a shop to do that, you're 20-25 hours, and to install time, depending on the shop, $125, $150 an hour. Do the math, it adds up pretty quick. So after you have everything cleared off, obviously the next thing you need to purchase is going to be the truss. You can't do any mock-ups or anything until you have a truss kit and figure out where your brackets are going to go. This particular kit, Artec, I think these are running around $500 for front, $500 for rear. So now you're another $1,000 in, depending on the brand that you choose to go with. All of the aftermarket truss kits that come with these things, they're set up for the factory style Jeep JK coil spring with shocks. So not only did I get the truss that I needed with all the controlling brackets I needed, now I'm modifying what I just purchased in the truss kit. I'm cutting the ends off so that I can put my coilover mounts on. Many builds that are out there, the guys are going to the extent of 1-tons, they're running coilovers on these things. So now that you have the cost of the axles and the cost of the truss, now you need to figure out, what am I going to run for the guts on this thing? You're running a ring and pinion on there. Everybody knows how much a standard gear set costs and an install kit. You're a few $100 in on the front, a few $100 in on the rear. That's just for the gears and install kit themselves. Now that you have your gears and master install kit, you have to make a decision, am I going to tackle that on my own, or am I going to have a shop do it?
You want the ultimate, you gotta be willing to pay the ultimate price.
I personally didn't feel comfortable doing it on my own. I don't have a problem doing it in something that's strictly a trail rig, but this is going to see highway speeds with my family in there. I want everything, backlash, everything to be set perfect. I think I paid probably $800 to have my front and rear gear set and the locker set. Speaking of locker, you have the price of lockers. Most people are going to go with a selectable locker. Chances are an A or B setup, which is what is in this, or an Eat Me locker. A lot of guys will run spools on these things. That's not as intricate, but the selectable lockers, which is more common, at least what we see, you're gonna have to find someone to set that up for you as well. Now, you're at the mercy of having strong center section, strong ring and pinion, strong locker. You gotta figure out what shafts you're gonna run. The factory 1480 shafts that come on these things, they're pretty stout, but I see them fail quite a bit, especially running 40s, 42s, like that's on this, in a heavy, full, loaded down vehicle that's getting beat on the trail. This particular axle has a 1550 axle set on it. The shafts are still the same strength, just a stronger U-joint. I think those ran a couple $100 per side, so you got to factor that cost in as well. So that's the actual axle itself. Now let's move on to the outer components. Reed knuckles, definitely worth the upgrade. They are not cheap. You're talking several $100s per side just for the knuckles themselves. I personally think that it is worth it to run them if you're going to do this build. Don't even mess with the factory knuckles. I've seen factory knuckles break on the trail, the geometry not work right. Just do yourself a favor and plan on running reed knuckles into your builder set. Once you have your reed knuckles installed, you're going to find that the stock steering, tie rod, and drag link is not going to work on there. So now you're going to have to either build your own set or find something that bolts on, such as this right here. This is aluminum, 2.5-ton steering kit. I believe this was about $1,500 at the time. Prices have gone up. There's a couple different options now. Also another added expense. When getting a junkyard axle set or salvage axle set, whatever you want to call it, the brakes are often either not there or not in good shape. This one on the front, one of the calipers was bad, so I had to replace that and ended up having to replace both side rotors, which I went with power stop. I mean, another $500 there. The rear, although there's not as many components to it as the front, you have a lot of the same implications. You're cutting off brackets, not as much because the rear of the Super Duty is leaf sprung, but you are having to weld on a truss. If you have the 05 through 07, you don't have to worry about the extra ribbing as much, but the 08 through 10, you do have to worry about that. Some guys are having to cut off extra casting off the center section. I've seen people blow through the center section on that. The rear, same thing. You're gonna have to get ring and pinion set, master install kit, and lockers. I have found great luck with the stock rear shafts on the Sterling 10.5. I don't see a reason to upgrade those, so I would say go ahead and reuse those. On this built set of axles, I am running aftermarket diff covers. I have the Moto-Bit ones on here. I love them. They're essentially bomb-proof. They're thick plate steel. I've bashed them on everything, and you get a lot more clearance than the factory cast ones from Ford. All in all, if you want a project to take on your own and have a sense of pride in the end and build it as you go, by all means, do a Super Duty axle swap on your Jeep. We can help you with that. We have access to all the components that you need. I've done several of these things. I would say just budget yourself roughly 20 to 25 hours from the time you get the axles, cut everything off, and put on all your new components. In addition to that, people always say I need to save money on there. I think the last time I added these up, I was somewhere in the $14,000 to $14,500 range just in parts to assemble this, not including labor that you would pay if you had a shop do it. So after running those axles for several years, that brought me to these. I can't say enough about this axle set. It's been on here for a while. This is a Dynatrac JK Elite 72.5 inch wide 60/80 set. Nothing but happiness with it. This right here, the best thing about the front is just the bolt-in capability of it, and that center section being offset properly as compared to the Super Duty axle. Just tons of clearance from that frame in there. This particular axle set I ordered from Dynatrac with bare tubing because I didn't need the factory JK brackets on there with my custom suspension setup, which is an option to order them that way. And I'm running the same coilover bypass setup that I had on my old axle set on this set. The center section on the rear Sterling is offset to the passenger side and interferes with the JK tank so much that it becomes a huge issue, ultimately resulting in running an aftermarket fuel cell like I did on this. The Dynatrac 80 and the 60 are all offset properly to work with the JK factory fuel tank. So had I gone with this axle set first, I would still be able to run the factory fuel tank with it, completely clearing everything that came on the Jeep as stock. Another great thing about these axles is just the plug and play ability. All the tone rings, all the sensors, everything is designed at Dynatrac to run as a complete bolt-in kit. So if you're running stock suspension setup on a JK, you can take your axles, take them out, throw them in the trash, sell them on eBay or whatever, take your Dynatrac set, put them in your Jeep, plug in your sensors, computer reads great, everything's good to go. The builder set, not so much. You're battling codes, you're downloading apps, getting code readers, everything. And you're trying to figure out what ABS sensors are gonna work, what lines are gonna work with the Jeep, what's gonna read properly with the Ford set. Dynatrac, plug and play.
My life is good. Really good.
A major component of your build is going to be your wheels. So you have these badass set of axles now built up and put on your Jeep. Now you gotta figure out what wheels you're gonna run on there. Most people are gonna wanna run a beadlock with their new setup. I was having a really tough time finding a set of beadlocks that I liked in the 8-on-170 bolt pattern that comes on these Super Duty axles. Ultimately, I ended up finding a set. Wasn't exactly what I wanted, but I settled. Ran those for years, they were fine. Whenever I swapped over to the Dynatrac set, these are 8-on-6.5 bolt pattern, way more common, tons of options. That right there is a plus in my opinion. Another really cool thing about the Dynatrac axles on the XT60s and the 80 rear, they actually have option to be able to bolt in a top hat or a truss to the center section in addition to being able to weld it. This set does not. This is a builder set. I had to cut, shape everything to get it work on there. I mean, I know at the end of the video you probably have your ears smoking, trying to figure out whether you want to build a set or buy a set. I've done both. Yes, we are in sales, so we're going to push Dynatrac just because we love the brand. But if you have any questions with building a set, we do offer all the components for this too, and we've been there, done that. We're enthusiasts. We understand both aspects of it. We'll help you build a set, help you get all the parts, run you through any tech issues that you run into, and we'll also help you spec out the Dynatrac axle set of your choice.